Chapter 26, The Path of Ash. The ember-choked winds howled through the ancient ruins as Joss and Veyna pressed forward, their bodies weary but their resolve unbroken. The battle at the crumbling gateway had left them bruised and exhausted, yet there was no time to stop. The Keykeeper's fire was their only chance to reinforce the failing seal, and every moment they delayed, the entity stirred closer to full awakening. The forest had changed since their last steps beyond the ruins. Where once the trees had stood tall and twisted, now only charred remains lined the landscape. Blackened trunks jutted from the scorched earth like the bones of a long-dead beast, and the air carried the acrid stench of something that had burned for centuries without ever being consumed. The Path of Ash, as the old legends called it, was a place few had ever entered, and none had ever returned from. Joss wiped soot from his brow and turned to Veyna. "You sure the Keykeeper is somewhere beyond this?" She nodded, though hesitation flickered in her silver eyes. "The stories say he was bound to the fire that once raged here. If he still exists, this is where we'll find him." Joss frowned at the desolation before them. "And if he doesn't?" Veyna exhaled, her breath ghostly in the dim light. "Then we'll have walked into the heart of something that should never have been disturbed." As they moved forward, the ground beneath them crunched with the brittle remnants of fallen leaves reduced to embers long ago. Each step sent up spirals of ash that swirled like lost souls in the fading light. The lantern Joss carried flickered erratically, its glow pale and weak. Something was wrong. The silence in the air was unnatural, thick and heavy, as if even the whispers of the Emberwood dared not follow them here. Joss gritted his teeth, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against his back. Then, a voice, low and rasping, like the dying breath of a fire, whispered through the darkness. "You seek the Keeper's fire, but do you know the price?" Joss and Veyna spun around, their weapons at the ready. The ground behind them had shifted, what had once been a field of ash was now a vast, yawning pit of smouldering embers. And from the swirling heat, a figure emerged. The Keykeeper. Or what was left of him. His body was wrapped in tattered robes, burnt and fused to his withered flesh. His hands, blackened like coal, smouldered with an inner fire, and his eyes, deep, hollow sockets, burned with flickering blue flames. Chains of scorched iron dragged behind him, their links clinking with every slow, deliberate step. Joss tightened his grip on the lantern. "We don't have time for riddles. The seal is breaking. The entity stirs." The Keykeeper's hollow gaze bore into him. "I know why you have come. But to take the Keeper's fire is to bear its burden. Its power does not come without a cost." Veyna stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "We don't have a choice. If the seal fails, the Emberwood, and everything beyond it, will be lost." The Keykeeper tilted his head, the flames in his eyes flickering. "Then tell me, wanderers of the broken path, what will you sacrifice?" The word sent a chill down Joss's spine. He exchanged a glance with Veyna, who remained silent for a long moment before stepping forward again. "My past," she said. "Take it." Joss's breath caught. "Veyna." She raised a hand, silencing him. "I already lost pieces of it to the Keeper of the Emberwood. I can give up the rest if it means stopping this." The Keykeeper studied her, the embers at his feet swirling with unseen energy. Then, with slow deliberation, he raised one charred hand and placed it against her forehead. The moment his fingers touched her skin, a surge of blue fire erupted between them. Veyna let out a sharp gasp as the flames consumed her, though she did not cry out in pain. Her silver eyes dulled for a brief instant, flickering as though something within her had been stripped away. When the flames receded, she staggered but did not fall. The Keykeeper stepped back, his burning sockets locked onto Joss. "And you?" he rasped. "What will you give?" Joss clenched his fists. He had nothing to offer, no magic, no memories he was willing to part with. But then, the weight of the lantern in his hands reminded him of what he still carried. He exhaled. "Take the lantern's light. Its power isn't mine to wield." Veyna's head snapped toward him. "Joss, no." But it was too late. The Keykeeper extended a hand, and the lantern flickered violently before its blue glow was torn from its glass confines, spiraling into the keeper's palm. The world around them darkened as the last remnants of the lantern's magic were stripped away, leaving them in shadow. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the keykeeper's form shifted, the fire within him growing brighter. He raised his hands, and from the depths of the scorched earth, a swirling inferno burst forth, taking shape in the air before them. The fire coalesced into a single, flickering wisp, small, yet impossibly heavy with ancient power. The keykeeper extended it to them. "The keeper's fire is yours," he intoned. "Use it wisely." Joss reached out, hesitating only a moment before taking the flame into his palms. It did not burn him, but he felt its weight, the responsibility it carried, the sacrifice it demanded. The keykeeper's form began to wane, his presence fading like dying embers. "Go now. The seal weakens. And the darkness is watching." With those final words, he vanished, his body crumbling into ash. The ground trembled beneath them, and a distant, echoing growl rumbled through the forest, the sound of something ancient, something powerful, stirring from its slumber. Veyna turned to Joss, her expression unreadable. "We need to move. Now." Joss nodded, gripping the fire tightly in his palm. The battle ahead would be their greatest yet. And the darkness was waiting. Chapter 27, The Veil of Dusk. The moment Joss and Veyna stepped beyond the path of ash, the weight of the keeper's fire pressed against them like an unseen force. It burned neither of them, yet they felt its presence in every heartbeat, in every breath. It was as if they carried not just a flame, but the will of something ancient, something that had witnessed the rise and fall of ages. The Emberwood had changed once again. The trees here were neither burnt nor twisted, but shrouded in an eerie twilight, their leaves frozen between the hues of dusk and midnight. The air felt heavier, charged with the energy of a place between worlds. Every step forward seemed to stretch unnaturally, as though they were walking within a dream where time and distance lost meaning. Joss glanced at Veyna. She looked different, still herself, but there was something missing in her eyes. The sacrifice she had made to the keykeeper had cost her more than either of them had anticipated. He wanted to ask if she was all right, but deep down, he already knew the answer. "Do you recognize this place?" he asked instead, keeping his voice steady. Veyna hesitated before shaking her head. "No, but that doesn't mean I've never been here." Her words unsettled him. She didn't remember because she couldn't, her past had been taken, piece by piece, in their pursuit of saving the Emberwood. A cold wind stirred the leaves, whispering through the branches in a language Joss could almost understand. He tightened his grip around the keeper's fire, feeling its warmth pulse against his skin. Then, from the depths of the twilight forest, a figure emerged. At first, it was little more than a silhouette against the dim glow of the eternal dusk. But as it stepped closer, its form took shape, a tall, hooded figure draped in robes woven from shadow and starlight. Where its face should have been, there was only a void, a hollow expanse that swallowed the light around it. Veyna tensed. "The Watcher," she murmured. Joss had heard the name before in the old legends, but standing before it now, he understood why those who spoke of it did so in hushed tones. The Watcher was not of this world, nor entirely beyond it, it was the veil between realms, the guardian of things that should never be touched. "You have come too far," the Watcher intoned, its voice like wind passing through the cracks of ancient stone. "The balance trembles on the edge of ruin." Joss stepped forward, his fingers tightening around the flame in his palm. "We don't want to destroy the balance. We're trying to save it." The Watcher's head tilted slightly, as though studying him. Then, its gaze, or what passed for one, shifted to Veyna. "You have already given much," it said. "Yet the path ahead demands more." Joss bristled. "She's given enough." The Watcher did not react. "The fire you carry is both salvation and damnation. If you wish to pass, you must prove you are worthy to wield it." The forest around them shifted, the trees bending and warping, their branches curling like skeletal fingers. The shadows deepened, and the ground beneath their feet became insubstantial, like mist rolling over water. Joss cursed under his breath. "Why is there always a test?" Veyna exhaled, drawing her dagger. Because power is never given freely. The Watcher raised a hand, and the world shattered. For a brief, terrible moment, Joss felt himself falling, not through space, but through time. Memories that were not his flashed before his eyes, a battlefield drenched in fire, a city swallowed by an endless void, a lone figure standing at the edge of a crumbling world. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the vision ceased. Joss found himself standing in a vast clearing, but something was wrong. The sky above was not the endless twilight of the Emberwood, but a storm-choked abyss, swirling with colors that defied understanding. The trees were gone, replaced by jagged spires of obsidian rock that jutted from the ground like the ribs of a buried titan. And he was alone. Veyna? His voice echoed unnaturally. No answer. The Watcher's voice resonated from nowhere and everywhere. Prove yourself. Joss clenched his fists. How? A low growl rumbled through the air. From the darkness beyond the clearing, something moved. A shadow detached itself from the void, unfurling like a creature waking from a deep slumber. It was shaped like a man, but lacked any defining features, a shifting silhouette, its body composed of swirling darkness and flickering embers. And it felt familiar. Joss took a step back as the shadow raised a hand, and in an instant, a blade formed from its darkness, an exact replica of his own sword. The realization struck him like a thunderclap. It was him. The Watcher's voice whispered once more. Conquer the darkness within, or be consumed by it. The shadow lunged. Joss barely had time to react before his doppelganger's blade came crashing down. He rolled aside, drawing his own weapon just in time to parry the next strike. The force of the blow sent vibrations up his arm, and he gritted his teeth. The shadow fought with his own movements, his own instincts. It anticipated his every strike, mirrored his every feint. But there was no hesitation in its attacks, no doubt. It fought without fear, without mercy. Joss dodged another strike and countered, but his blade passed through the shadow's form as though cutting through smoke. His breath came fast and ragged. How do you fight something that is you? The shadow circled him, its ember-like eyes burning with silent judgment. It raised its blade again, preparing for another attack. Joss tightened his grip. Then, something within him shifted. He understood. He wasn't meant to defeat it. He was meant to accept it. Lowering his weapon, Joss took a step forward. The shadow hesitated, its form flickering. I know what you are, Joss said quietly. You're the part of me that's afraid. The part that doubts if I can do this. The shadow did not move. Joss took another step, his voice steady. I won't fight you anymore. The darkness shuddered. For a brief moment, the ember-like eyes softened. Then, the shadow dissolved. The clearing shifted once more, and Joss was standing back in the Emberwood, the Watcher before him. You have passed. He turned and found Veyna beside him, her expression unreadable. You saw it too, he said. It wasn't a question. Veyna nodded. We all carry shadows. The Watcher lifted a hand, and the forest around them pulsed with an unseen energy. The path ahead became clear, a trail winding through the depths of the Emberwood, leading toward the heart of the coming battle. Go, the Watcher said. The fate of the Emberwood now rests in your hands. With the Keeper's fire in their grasp and the path before them, Joss and Veyna stepped forward. The final battle was drawing near. Chapter 28, The Heart of the Emberwood. The path before them stretched endlessly, winding through the deepening twilight of the Emberwood. Though they had passed the Watcher's trial, the weight of their journey pressed heavier than ever. The forest around them pulsed, not with life, but with a presence ancient and watchful. Veyna kept her gaze forward, her grip firm on the hilt of her dagger. Joss followed closely, the Keeper's fire cradled in his hand. The flame flickered strangely now, casting shifting shadows that danced along the gnarled roots and twisted branches. We're close, Veyna murmured. Joss glanced at her. How do you know? She hesitated before answering. I can feel it. Like a memory just out of reach. the thought unsettled him. The deeper they ventured, the more the forest seemed to stir, as if something within it was awakening. He didn't doubt that Veyna could feel it more than he could, she had already lost so much to the Emberwood. A distant hum filled the air, low and resonant, like a pulse beneath the earth. The trees trembled, and the whispers returned, curling through the mist like ghostly tendrils. They no longer spoke words, only a fragmented, sorrowful melody that sent chills racing down Joss's spine. Then, the path opened into a vast glade. At its center stood a colossal tree, unlike any they had seen before. Its bark was dark as charred wood, yet veins of ember-like light pulsed beneath its surface. The branches stretched high, forming a canopy of smoldering leaves that shifted between deep crimson and shimmering gold. The air was thick with heat and energy, as though the very essence of the forest converged here. The heart of the Emberwood, Veyna whispered. Joss barely heard her. His eyes were locked on the base of the great tree, where a gaping chasm had begun to tear open, spilling forth tendrils of writhing darkness. The entity was no longer trapped beneath the forest. It was emerging. Joss, Veyna said sharply, drawing his focus. He followed her gaze to the figures standing at the edge of the glade. 3 of them, cloaked in tattered robes of deep maroon, their faces hidden beneath heavy hoods. Their presence felt wrong, as if they had been plucked from a time long forgotten. The tallest stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice was like dry leaves rustling in a dying wind. You should not have come. Joss tightened his grip on the keeper's fire. We're here to stop this. The figure inclined his head slightly. You believe you are meant to? Veyna stepped forward, her stance rigid. You're the ones who weakened the seal. We are the keepers of the first flame, the robed figure intoned. We have done what must be done. Joss exchanged a glance with Veyna. You caused this? The prison was never meant to last, another figure said, his voice softer but no less unsettling. The entity was bound, not destroyed. Its return is inevitable. The world must be reforged in fire. Joss felt his stomach twist. You want this thing to escape? The tallest figure lifted a hand, gesturing to the pulsing chasm at the tree's base. The old world is fading. From the ashes, a new one must rise. Veyna's expression darkened. You're mad. The robed figures remained still, their presence unnervingly patient, as if time itself bowed to them. You carry the keeper's fire, the leader finally said, his tone unreadable. But even its light cannot undo what has begun. Joss stepped forward, jaw clenched. We're going to try anyway. The moment the words left his lips, the air around them shifted. The robed figures did not move, yet suddenly, the shadows at their feet coiled and lunged. Joss barely had time to react before darkness engulfed him. The descent. The world vanished into blackness, a suffocating void that swallowed sound and sight alike. For a heartbeat, Joss felt nothing, no ground beneath his feet, no air in his lungs. Then, like a flame sparking in the dark, a vision flickered to life. He stood on the edge of a battlefield, one that stretched beyond the horizon, littered with the remains of the fallen. The sky above burned with the same ember-like glow as the tree at the heart of the forest. Shadows moved among the ruins, whispering in tongues long forgotten. And in the center of it all stood himself. Or rather, something that wore his form. Joss watched as his doppelganger strode forward, his movement slow and deliberate. In his hand, he held the keeper's fire, but it was different. Twisted. Corrupted. The flames were no longer golden but deep crimson, flickering with unnatural hunger. The whispers grew louder. They were not words but pleas. The ground trembled, and from the depths of the battlefield, the entity rose. A shifting mass of darkness, its form ever-changing, sometimes humanoid, sometimes monstrous, its body woven from shadow and ember light. It did not move like a creature, but like the embodiment of something far greater. Joss wanted to run, to turn away, but the vision held him in place. His other self raised the corrupted flame. The entity reached for it. A choice. To wield the fire and unleash it. Or to resist. The vision shattered. Joss gasped as he was thrown back into the present, collapsing onto the scorched earth of the glade. Veyna was beside him, panting, her own face pale with whatever she had seen. The robed figures remained standing, their presence unshaken. "Now you understand," the leader murmured. Joss rose to his feet, heart hammering. "I understand that you're wrong." The chasm at the base of the great tree widened, and the first tendrils of the entity emerged. The battle for the Emberwood had begun. Chapter 29, The Shadow Unleashed. The ground quaked beneath their feet, sending deep fractures through the ashen soil. The chasm at the base of the great tree pulsed with an eerie, ember-like glow as tendrils of shadow slithered free, writhing in the heavy air. The entity was no longer bound, it was awakening. Joss scrambled to his feet, the keeper's fire clutched tightly in his grasp. The flame flickered wildly, its golden hue barely holding against the encroaching darkness. Veyna stood beside him, her dagger glinting as she braced herself against the tremors. The three robed figures, the so-called keepers of the first flame, remained motionless, watching as the dark tendrils coiled like serpents seeking prey. Their leader, the tallest of them, finally lifted his hood, revealing a face weathered by time, his eyes glowing with ember-like fire. "You resist the inevitable," he intoned. "The old world must burn so the new may rise." Joss spat on the ground. "Then we'll make sure neither of you sees that new world." The robed figures did not react, but the shadows did. As if answering an unspoken command, the tendrils lunged. Joss barely had time to react before one of them wrapped around his arm, the cold of it burning like frostbite. He gritted his teeth and thrust the keeper's fire forward, the golden flame flared, and the tendril recoiled with an ear-piercing shriek. "Fire can hurt them," he shouted. Veyna was already moving. She rolled beneath another shadowed limb and drove her dagger into the ground, releasing a pulse of raw energy that forced the darkness back. But it wasn't enough. The tendrils kept coming, lashing out in a relentless onslaught. Joss fought with everything he had, using the flame like a shield, but for every shadow burned away, more emerged from the widening chasm. The great tree trembled, its emberlit bark cracking as the entity pushed against its prison. "We can't keep this up," Veyna called out, slashing through another tendril. Joss knew she was right. The entity was gaining strength, too much strength. They needed to stop it before it fully emerged. Then, as if the forest itself had heard their desperate thoughts, something shifted. The wind howled through the clearing, carrying with it an ancient voice, not a whisper, but a command. The roots of the great tree pulsed, and from the far edges of the glade, figures began to emerge from the mist. The stone figures. The cursed remnants of those who had once lived within the Emberwood. One by one, they stepped forward, their lifeless eyes now burning with ember fire. Once frozen in terror, they now moved with purpose. Veyna sucked in a breath. "They're waking up." Joss's chest tightened as realization struck. The souls trapped within the Emberwood were no longer prisoners. The entity had stolen their lives, but now they fought back. The battle had truly begun. The Guardian's reckoning. The first of the awakened figures raised its stone arm, and from within, fire erupted. It was not the dark flame of the entity, nor the golden light of the keeper's fire, it was something older, something belonging to the Emberwood itself. The flames spread like wildfire, and as more of the stone figures stepped forward, the battlefield became a storm of light and shadow. The entity shrieked, its voice rippling through the air like a tidal wave. More tendrils lashed outward, trying to smother the growing resistance, but the stone figures did not falter. They fought as one, wielding fire and force against the darkness that had stolen their world. Joss turned to Veyna. "We have a chance. We have to strike now." She nodded, determination set in her silver eyes. "Then let's finish this." Together, they charged toward the heart of the glade, where the chasm gaped wider, the entity's form pressing against the barrier that had long held it at bay. The robed figures stood in their path, but they no longer looked so sure. The leader lifted a hand, calling forth the shadows once more. "You do not understand what you fight for." Joss's grip tightened on the keeper's fire. "We understand enough." He threw the flame. The golden fire surged, spiraling toward the figures in a brilliant arc. The lead keeper barely had time to react before it struck him, engulfing his cloak in searing light. The others tried to retreat, but the stone warriors descended upon them, forcing them into battle. Joss and Veyna didn't stop. They reached the base of the tree, standing before the chasm that pulsed like a living wound. From within, the entity shifted, its form twisting, emerging. Veyna raised her dagger, its blade now glowing with the fire of the Emberwood itself. Joss held the keeper's flame high, its light radiating against the darkness. The final stand had begun. Chapter 30, The Flames of Reckoning. The chasm pulsed with unnatural energy, its ember-like glow growing ever brighter as the entity's form twisted against its prison. The air itself felt heavier, thick with the weight of something ancient and malignant pushing against the fabric of the world. Joss and Veyna stood before it, their weapons gleaming with the very essence of the Emberwood's fire. Around them, the battle raged, the stone guardians fought with unrelenting fury, their once cursed forms now wielding the forest's wrath against the keepers and the writhing tendrils of shadow. The entity let out a shrieking wail, its voice shaking the very ground. More tendrils erupted from the chasm, their sheer force nearly knocking Joss backward. He barely had time to recover before one lashed toward him, moving too fast to dodge. "Joss!" Veyna lunged, slashing her dagger across the tendril before it could strike. The blade, now infused with the fire of the Emberwood, burned through the shadow like a hot knife through wax. Joss exhaled shakily. "Thanks. Don't mention it." She gritted her teeth, her silver eyes reflecting the chaos around them. "We have to seal the chasm now." Joss knew she was right. The longer they waited, the stronger the entity became. But how? The keeper's flame could hurt the darkness, but could it truly lock it away again? Then he noticed the tree roots, massive, ancient, and pulsing with the same ember-like glow as the lantern he carried. This tree wasn't just any tree. It was part of the seal. "Veyna!" He pointed. "The tree, it's the key." Her eyes widened in realization. "Then we use it." They moved as one. Veyna slashed through another tendril, clearing the way as Joss sprinted forward, the keeper's flame held high. He reached the base of the great tree, placing his free hand against the bark. A warmth, deep and familiar, pulsed beneath his fingertips. The Emberwood recognized him. The chasm's glow brightened, the entity's form pushing harder against its prison. A guttural voice, layered with countless tones, spoke from the depths of the darkness. "You cannot hold me." Joss's grip tightened on the flame. "Watch us." He thrust the keeper's fire against the tree's core. The reaction was immediate. The ember-like veins running through the bark flared, spreading out in a brilliant cascade of golden-red light. The fire surged into the roots, down through the cracks, straight toward the heart of the chasm. The entity screamed. Veyna raised her dagger high. "Let's finish this." She drove the dagger into the base of the tree, and a shockwave of energy burst forth. The fire of the Emberwood ignited, racing along the roots, consuming the darkness that had slithered free. The tendrils writhed and collapsed into themselves, unable to resist the ancient power surging through the land. The robed keepers let out agonized cries as the golden flames engulfed them. One by one, they fell, their bodies crumbling into ash as the forest reclaimed them. Joss felt the earth tremble beneath him as the chasm began to close. The entity, now fully aware of its impending fate, let out one final, horrific wail. The darkness imploded, sucked back into the abyss as the tree's roots wove together, sealing the prison once more. Then, silence. The ground stilled. The air cleared. The oppressive weight of the entity's presence vanished. Joss fell to his knees, his heart pounding. The keeper's flame had dimmed, its purpose fulfilled. Veyna, breathing heavily, sheathed her dagger. "Is it over?" Joss looked at the tree. Its bark was no longer cracked. The ember-like glow had faded, but he could still feel its warmth. The seal was whole again. He let out a shaky breath. "Yeah. It's over." Veyna sat beside him, the weight of their journey finally settling in. We actually did it. Joss gave a tired chuckle. Yeah. We did. The Stone Guardians, their mission complete, stilled, their ember-like eyes flickering out one by one. They had found their peace at last. The Emberwood, once cursed, was finally free. And so were they.